Chapter 9, The Miserable Life of Bernie LeBaron, Squirrels and Nails. The next day, Mrs. Grimm handed back the English papers on her summer vacation with little sarcastic comments like, "You need to make friends with a dictionary." She stopped in front of me and I braced for it. "Some great literature has been written about animals," she said. "You should read some." I glanced down at the paper she dropped on my desk. A big red C covered most of the page. Then she moved on. When she came to the last paper, she stopped and bent down to stare Brock right in the eyes. His face changed color. The entire class perched on the edges of their seats in terrified expectation. "Did you hear someone screaming last night?" she asked. "Did you hear someone crying out in agony?" That was me. Then she started yelling. "I wanted to gouge my eyes out, it was so bad. You broke every rule I put on the board. Never do it again." She straightened, smoothed her tight red dress, and moved to the back of the room. I swear I saw steam coming out of her ears. I tried not to rejoice in another student's humiliation. After all, we are the same species. But I couldn't help it. Brock had it coming. "Pull out your readers," Mrs. Grimm said. "We're going to start with Edgar Allan Poe." Wow, that Poe guy had some serious issues. He must have had the worst nightmares ever. I bet he and Hitchcock would have been best friends. Mrs. Grimm read us the Telltale Heart, in which some Fruit Loop murders a helpless old man with blue eyes because he doesn't like the way his bad eye looks at him. Then he stuffs the body beneath the floorboards. You've got to be psycho yourself to come up with a story like that. All while she read the Telltale Heart, I kept thinking of the man carrying the body into the woods and a marigold's yellow eye that dribbled ooze. I mean, I was probably messing around with at least one psycho like the dude in the story. Maybe two. My skin started crawling and I could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall, the thump of someone's shoes in the hallway, and the rattle of the wind against the window pane. I began looking at all the kids in the class, wondering if any of them were crazy like the guy in the story. Mrs. Grimm bellowed the last line, which reads, "Villains!" I shrieked. "Dissemble no more! I admit the deed. Tear up the planks! Here, here! It is the beating of his hideous heart!" I jumped and knocked the books off my desk. The whole class became as silent as death. Well, except for the girl in the back who was sobbing. "Now," Mrs. Grimm smiled, "how would you interpret this story? What does it mean?" No one wanted to answer because I think we were all still listening for the thump of the hideous heart. I figured the meaning was obvious. Watch out for people who don't like you because they could be murderers. Since no one raised their hand, Mrs. Grimm called on me. I sat stunned. Me? Why would she pick on me? I said, "The guy was so crazy that he didn't know he was crazy?" To my surprise, her spider-like head bobbed in approval. "Exactly," she said. "Poe was playing with the idea of rationality. What is the key here to irrationality? To insanity." The guy thought he was rational? "Don't make it a question, Bernie. Have more confidence in your analysis. You're correct, of course. Now, class, what evidence do we have of his irrationality?" Well, I managed to keep out of the rest of the discussion, though I couldn't stop wondering if the big man in the woods had murdered the person in the gunny sack over something equally as stupid as the creep in Poe's story. And if he did that mean he was irrational? Insane? If he was insane, what else might he do? I mean, the guy in Poe's story had killed that man because he didn't like his eye. Could this guy I caught on my camera be some mad, raving psychopath? After reading Poe, I had a hard time going back into the woods to set up my cameras. I kept hearing thumping sounds like a beating heart in the forest. Things creaked. The sighing of the dead whispered amid the trees. I knew the hand of the murdered man I had seen being carried through the woods was going to reach up through the leaves and grab my ankle. Flashes of blue and yellow eyes peered at me from the bushes. I wasn't alone. Somewhere, the ghost of the dead man was hunting for me. I checked over my shoulder every other minute as I wrestled my cameras into place. I had the whole area surrounded where my other two cameras had snapped pictures of the man with the hat. I'd leave them for a week. That way I would get him for sure. I finished chaining the last one to a pine tree when a crash echoed through the woods. I didn't wait around to see what it was. I didn't want to know. I beat it as fast as my puny legs would carry me, chased out of the woods by a drooling eye and bloody gunny sack. The whole experience made me wonder if it was worth it to read the greatest literature in the English language, if it just made you too paranoid to live. The week passed before I knew it. Brock decided that it was his job to make my life miserable. Every chance he got, he knocked my books out of my hands, and he slammed the locker closed while I was still using it. He and a couple of his friends started waiting for me with their BB guns where the road passed through a swampy area. A BB gun can pack a wallop, and when it hits you in the bare flesh of the head or on the arm or leg, it stings like nobody's business. It took me a while to figure out where they were hiding. Once I did, I started going the long way around. They figured that out, and so I had to alternate my route. I was making a list of grievances, and I was going to collect someday. At least, I hoped I would. I also saw Tatiana 3 times that week while I was delivering papers. The first time, she was going into someone's house while I was riding under an old crabapple tree. I was watching her when she turned to look right at me. I was just about to smile and wave when I rode through the biggest spider's web ever created. It was thick and sticky, and I knew that a spider that could make that kind of web had to be the size of a baseball. At least I didn't scream, or I don't think I did. I yanked my hands off my handlebars to swat every inch of my head and face trying to kill the spider before it bit me. After I untangled myself from the bike and the newspaper bag, I looked over to where Tatiana had been, but she wasn't there. Could I dare hope that she hadn't seen me? Not a chance. What a chump. The second time it was raining and I was soaked to the skin. I stopped at the corner to wait for a light, and she was coming out of a store with an umbrella. A car sped past trying to catch a yellow light and drenched me from head to toe with nasty water that smelled like, well, I don't want to say. After I scraped the fetid mud from my eyes, Tatiana was gone, and some big guy in jeans and a t-shirt stood by the hardware store staring at me. I think I would have preferred it if he had laughed, but he just stared like he was waiting for a pumpkin to sprout out of my head. The rain dripped off his hooked nose, and he had a kind of stupid expression on his face. Something about the way he watched me gave me the shivers, and I pedaled away into the pouring rain. The third time I saw Tatiana was the real clincher, though. She was strolling along with some girls heading towards the park while I was riding past. I waved at her and she waved back. I mean, she really waved back, like she meant it. Then I sat back to ride without hands and folded my arms across my chest. I knew I looked cool, and was feeling good that I had managed to see her without making myself look like a complete idiot, when some numbskull opened his car door right in my path. I tried not to scream, but a strangled cry escaped my throat as I kissed the car door. Those weren't the only perils I ran into that week. Being a newspaper boy has its hazards too. Some little punk dog that looked like a glorified rat with an attitude came up behind me and sank his needle-sharp teeth right into my Achilles tendon. I turned around to kick the little rat, and the next week, when its owner came out on the porch and called the monster to her, saying, "Come here, sweetie." I figured there was something really wrong with the world when a midget dog could bite me, and I didn't even get the satisfaction of kicking it to kingdom come. I also had a run-in with a woman who screamed at me because her paper was late. Some man threw his shoes at me when I didn't get the paper in exactly the right place. One guy had a house that smelled like a sewer, and an old lady had more cats than there were people in the town. Anyway, Zinnia's Pink Parlor became a kind of safe haven for me that week. I started popping in every day for purely selfish reasons, safety and cookies. Not necessarily in that order. I learned to dodge Marigold when she answered the door. She always greeted me like I was her long-lost relative. I tried not to look at her different-colored eyes, but after reading Poe, they drew my attention with a morbid fascination. I was beginning to understand how a person like the psycho killer in Poe's story could let something like that get to them. I mean, if someone was already messed up in the head, Marigold's eyes could definitely send them over the edge. I also had to go to that dimwit dentist again that week to have the rest of my teeth yanked. He said one of them was getting loose all by itself, so he only had to pull 2 more. This time he made me wait twice as long. I guess he didn't want to hear me shrieking in agony again. So I didn't feel much. The idiot stick was sweating buckets by the time he finished, though, and once he even crawled up on the dentist chair to get better leverage. I was seriously tempted to give him my knee right in the... but I resisted. Now, I really was the toothless wonder. I looked in the mirror when I got home and just about cried. I had 2 huge front teeth, and 2 missing teeth on either side. Chipmunk. I looked like a skinny chipmunk. How the heck was I going to eat apples? Stupid body. I decided never to smile again. Saturday morning, I headed back into the woods to get my cameras. When I passed the last house with the weird mailbox, the guy was standing by it like he was waiting for me. Man, he was big. I thought Carl, the blonde kid from school, was big, but this guy had to be 6.5 feet tall and so broad in the shoulders, I don't know how he got through doorways. What turned my blood cold was the big cowboy hat he had on his head. Just like the guy in my pictures. He could have been in one of the Hitchcock movies. My legs went all squishy and it suddenly became very hard to breathe. When I stopped to hand him the paper, I tried not to let him see my hand shaking. He studied me like he was reading me the way you would a book. "If I were you," he said, "I'd move my cameras someplace else." I stared at him for a few moments before I said, yes, sir. I mean, how did he know I put my cameras in the woods? I don't know why I added the sir stuff. It just seemed right. He was so big and scary, I couldn't help myself. "Name's Jed," he said. I nodded and skedaddled as fast as my squishy legs would pedal. He knew what I was doing in the forest. How could he know unless he had been watching me? It must have been his boot print in the anthill. It had to be him. He had been carrying the body into the woods. He had been poaching foxes and coyotes out of season. He was the madman who was waiting to kill me. I was so preoccupied trying to figure out what I should do that I hardly realized I had reached my first camera. When my eyes focused on the spot where my camera should have been, I just about let out that weird 13-year-old scream. My camera was gone. In its place, a dead squirrel had been nailed to the tree. Its blood had trickled down to stain the bark black. Terror gripped my throat like a vice. The murderer had left a grisly message for me.